Welcome back to day 6 of Hammerween and day 2 of Vampire Weekends. As promised, we're going to be looking at 1974's Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, or 1972 when it was actually filmed. It shouldn't be quite as long as yesterday's installment. There's less to talk about, both plot-wise and review-wise, I think. So let's get into it, shall we? So Dr. Marcus, a local guy in these parts in this woods behind me here, round Hammerway, round Bray Studios, calls in his old army buddy, Captain Kronos. Says, "Do you know there's a lot of killings going on, and I'm just not sure about all these killings. They're really getting me down. What do you think about them?" And we've seen a couple take place already at the start of the film, and they're not your usual vampire attacks, where we expect to see, a Christopher Lee dashing type or some sort of stand-in. It's an amorphous shape, clad in black, carrying out these attacks. So we're not sure, is it a what? Is it a who? What's going on there? And Captain Kronos and his sidekick are going to hopefully help solve the case here. So Captain Kronos is the swashbuckling hero type, and his sidekick is Professor Hieronymus Grost, played by John Cater, and he's very much the ostensible Van Helsing. He knows the lore. He knows how to deal with these things. Along the way, they've also picked up Carla, who they found in the stocks, played by Carolyn Monroe. She was being pelted with fruit for the crime of dancing on a Sunday. Kids today, what are they like? That gives us a rather unusual structure to the first part of this film, where we don't know who the vampires are or what they are, anything like that. But we obviously know vampires are afoot because we've seen the killings, and the film's called Captain Kronos, a Vampire Hunter. It would be a rather dull film without some kind of vampire in it. But there's much more of a Holmes Watson type relationship as they investigate where these vampires may be, who may be a vampire, how to suss them out, including all sorts of really fun stuff involving toads being buried in small coffins. And if the dead toad is resurrected whilst on the road, then a vampire there may be. So vampires' very presence resurrects dead toads in their coffins. So that's how they find out who vampires are in this film. Rather unusual. Um, so the first half of the film really is dedicated to the actual investigation of who is the vampire in town. And our main suspects come from this family, the Durward family. And they're old money. They're the unlikable types in these kind of films where they're a bit snobby. They're all well dressed as opposed to everyone else is a bit shabby looking. And they're quite snooty about their place in society. Shane Bryant plays the son of the family. Shane Bryant was like Ralph Bates, one of those actors Hammer kept trying to make into one of their new stars in this era. Never quite worked, but not for the want of trying because both great actors. And we have as the mother of the family, the Durwards, we have Wanda Ventham as Lady Durward. Wanda Ventham is Benedict Cumberbatch's mother in real life. Now, if you do the maths in your head, if you know Wanda Ventham and Shane Bryant, she's not old enough to be his mother. So there's something going on there, of course. Right? And believe me, this is not a spoiler when I go into that part of the film. Film 101, you'd know exactly what's going on here. So, all sorts of traps for the vampires are laid out in the woods behind me there and whatnot. There's a bit of a subplot involving Ian Hendry as the local heavy in town, who's he's going to take care of this Kronos guy. Captain Kronos kills him and two other guys in about 5 seconds, makes mincemeat of them. It's I don't think he even uses two sword moves to kill all three of them. I think it's just one swish, and he just kills all three of them by taking their throats out. So Quite a bit of time is devoted to Ian Hendry's introduction as a kind of Bill Sikes from Oliver Twist type character. Goes absolutely nowhere. Completely pointless. But hey, it sets up Captain Kronos as a badass, as does a hillside part where some local villagers with pitchforks and torches, etc., set about him and Professor Hieronymus. So Captain Kronos dispatches them as well. So really, those two scenes are just to set him up as being a real swashbuckler, and for no other reason. They kind of waste Ian Hendry, and they kind of waste a good 10 minutes of the film setting him up, to be honest. But the film all kind of it's a very nice condensed narrative, which is good when summing up, where it all leads towards the Durwards, all leads towards their house. Dr. Marcus, who called um, Kronos in the first place, he's turned to a vampire. There's a slightly comedic scene where they're trying to, well, we'd best kill you then, my friend. Sorry about that. And they can't do it. They can't find a way to bump him off because one fun part they add to the vampire lore of Hammer here, as opposed to Dracula, is there are all sorts of different types of vampire. So don't just think of um, stakes to the heart, uh, Bible verses, crosses, running water, whatever it may be. I think we're told by Hieronymus at one point that there's many different types of vampire as there are creatures of the earth, which just going by numbers alone must surely be an exaggeration. But regardless, and even that kind of comes to nothing because eventually a crucifix and stakes are involved to save the day. So they kind of add stuff in here that, hey, that's interesting. Oh, they haven't done anything with it. But anyway, that's part of the review. But it's interesting to add that to the lore, and it does again add a bit of comedy to the scene with Dr. Marcus having been turned to a vampire, and they just can't bloody kill him because you need to work out the right way to kill specific types of vampire. So, oh well, we can't just stake him to the heart. We need to do that at the point of his actual death. So we'll need to try and hang him or maybe burn him, and then see if we can, stake him just at the exact. We'll figure it out somehow. It's it's just on the cusp of being a bit carry on vampire, right? Never goes too far in that direction. And all roads, of course, lead to the Durwards, the only suspects in town anyway. The only mystery is, are they all vampires, just like Kiss of the Vampire yesterday? Um, is it the deceased father, whose grave they go to visit? Or is it and again, spoilers if you don't really want to know, skip ahead 30 seconds. Is it Wanda Ventham as the mother who's far too young to be actually an old widow woman of mother of two who are in their 30s? Yes, it's the old woman who's clearly found the fountain of youth. So she's supposed to be in her 70s or 80s, but she's played by an actress in her early 30s. So of course she's the bloody vampire. There's no spoiler in telling you that. But that also leads to a nice bit of a twist, which I won't go into, where she's got a couple of plans behind her. And she's using her vampiric powers, which again are different from Dracula's and different from some of the other vampires we'll meet in this mini series as we go through the month, um, where there's an element of stopping time in, uh, in, in a way, which again I won't go into. I won't spoil the very end twist for people. But suffice to say that regardless of what that twist may be, good wins the day. Um, Professor Hieronymus, Captain Kronos, and Carla ride out onto another adventure. And hey, wasn't that a good old time? Please tip your waitress, kind of thing, right? That's the vague plot of the film. There's a lot more intricacies in there, but not too many. It's not a convoluted film by any stretch of the imagination. Captain Kronos was written and directed by the great Brian Clemens, who created The Avengers. And what Sweeney was it? And The Professionals created so much, and thriller and supernatural created loads of stuff. And you can see the structure because this is structured like an Avengers episode. It just happens to be feature length, where, say, Steed and his sidekick, funnily enough, Ian Hendry, who's the heavy that gets bumped off too soon, was the original sidekick for Steed. But Steed and his sidekick, whoever it may be, Emma Peel say, they would spend the first part of the story investigating the problem, and then, it comes towards a big action scene. So it's structured very televisually in that regard. But it does work. It also gives it a bit more of that, again, slightly Conan Doyle-like setup of having to suss out the suspect first before you can clamp down. So unlike again Dracula, you don't know who we're really looking for. You've got a vague notion, but you don't know who we're quite looking for towards until towards the very end of the film. What does let it down? Horst Janssen as Captain Kronos. He looks great. He looks very contemporary to 1972, 74. He looks like Michael York, but he's dubbed by Julian Holloway, and the dubbing job's really bad. It doesn't give him that kind of. He should have more of an Errol Flynn type adventure hero thing about him. Or Simon Williams would have been perfect dubbing. Dub Simon Williams on there. That would have been perfect. But he's a bit flat. He's quite dull and doesn't play up to some of the more arch dialogue of the piece. And there's some great dialogue throughout it. But Julian Holloway's dubbing kind of lets it down on that front. The pacing itself, yeah, it could certainly use tightened up. I can see why they put in that scene with Ian Hendry to have some action earlier on in the film, but you set up Ian Hendry for 10 minutes and then Captain Kronos kills him within 2 seconds. That's not terribly satisfying. Give us a bit more sword play at that point. I think that would have worked just to keep the flow of the film going a little bit more. But apart from that, it's a really fun adventure movie mixed with a vampire film. So a lot of people have commented over the years that this is the kind of thing Hammer should have been doing to try and resurrect themselves, pardon the pun, given the vampiric nature of the discussion. But to kind of bring themselves more contemporary, they should have been doing this kind of thing where it's more adventure for the young audience at the time. I don't know. I think the time had just passed and the budgets weren't getting any higher. The British film levies had disappeared at this point, so they weren't getting any major investments. They weren't working with big studios in America anymore. So, to me, the time had just passed. Their initial idea was that Captain Kronos, who we find out at one point has previously been bitten and survived a vampire attack, Captain Kronos was going to be somewhat immortal, so would be able to have adventures throughout time. Titan Comics did a comic adaptation where they play about with that a little bit. But yeah, Captain Kronos going through the centuries might have been an interesting 4 or 5 film series, but Hammer were just running on fumes at this point, unfortunately. Carol Monroe's good, not great. She doesn't get much to do, unfortunately. But John Cater as Hieronymus is he's a blast. There's a wonderful friendship between Kronos and Hieronymus, which completely buy. Everyone plays it really well, actually. Shane Bryant is suitably slimy as the son of the Durwards, who you think he's clearly a vampire because he's slimy and sleazy, and he's played by Shane Bryant, and I've seen him in other films, and he's usually a baddie, so yeah, he's definitely a vampire. So it's all played very well. It's written mostly very well, with a good shape and a good structure. Budget lets it down, and just a few pacing issues let it down. And then definitely the dubbing of Kronos himself lets it down. It could have been a real banger of a vampire film, which even if you don't like vampire films, you could just have enjoyed as a kind of Sherwood Forest type adventure film if you like the early Hammer Robin Hoods, for example. But alas, it's just not quite at that level. Just not quite at that level. But what it is, for what it is still very entertaining. Recommended. I think you'll see a lot of potential in it. I think you'll just see a bit more missed potential, unfortunately. So more than solid, but just not quite the classic that I think a lot of people think it is. Um, so I happily admit that I'm in the minority in this, and most people seem to love Captain Kronos. But I think it's very good, and there's greatness in there, but it's just missed, unfortunately. Just missed. Oh well. But that'll do us for day 6 as we reach this first week of the Hammerween ending. Let me know in the comments if there are any that you want me to cover from the original run of Hammer, not Dracula's and not Frankenstein's, because I've covered them on The Monster's Den, on Sea of Tranquility, and we're trying intentionally to delve a bit deeper anyway. Okay, so let me know. No guarantees, but I'll try and cover a few at least. And I'm sure I'll bump off some favorites anyway, just because there's a finite amount. But that'll do us for today. Tomorrow, join me and we'll be back to black and white. And we're going to be looking at a film from 1958, The Snorkel. So I'll see you then.